it's an honor to be with you. As Joel said, I was the mayor of the city of Thousand Oaks while I was still the pastor of the church. My mother used to say, in mixed company, never talk about religion or politics, so I'm the guy you don't invite to the dinner party. That's all I talk about. And I've always been political. I endorse candidates from the pulpit, and I send my tape, or no, I send the CD or whatever, the recording into the IRS. I say, come get me. They never have. I've been doing that for 30 years. We endorse candidates. We have them come and speak. I've run for office. And I was the mayor pro tem of the city of Thousand Oaks on November 8th, 2018, when a gunman went into a country western dance hall and killed 12 of our young people on college night. 2 of them were from my congregation. 8 days later, I became mayor. And then the city is encircled by open space, and it caught fire, so it was satanic. The entire city was in flames. Our young people had been shot, and so many had been wounded. Critical time. And what was fascinating to me from that tragedy, where they were grateful to have a pastor as the mayor, and we did a vigil that night, and I remember my opponent came up to me, and I thought she hated me, and she came up when we did the vigil, and she just grabbed me, and her husband was there, and she was sobbing, and she backed up, and she said, I wish you had been there when my daughter was murdered. And I didn't know she'd lost a daughter. And anyone who says that a pastor shouldn't be in politics, did you know that you're in the United States of America? I was just wondering. The first speaker of the House was a pastor, Muhlenberg. And his brother said that he was on the wrong side of Christendom because he was political. He said, no, you're on the wrong side of Christendom. And then his brother's church got burned, and then he became a senator and realized, well, we should be in politics. The British burned it. As I was pondering what to share, and I was listening to Stephen talk, I'm so amazed at the depth of understanding you have that so many pastors lack. But there is an awakening in the country, and I'm grateful. I heard a quote from Peter Drucker. He said, the important thing is to identify the future that has already happened. The important thing is to identify the future that has already happened. And I like what one person said in relation to defining that. He said, the difference between people who have a surface confidence and they glump along with the herd, and then you compare that with those who have deep wisdom that see what is already happening before anyone else does. And I'll share with you why this is important tonight. Isaiah 41, and by the way, you're saying, do you have any PowerPoints? No, but I hope my points have power. All right. Isaiah 41 says, show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Yes, do good or do evil, that we may be dismayed and see it together. Indeed, you are nothing and your work is nothing. He who chooses you is an abomination. And then finally in 1 Chronicles 12:32, one of the tribes spoken of are the peoples. The Lord gave them a defining characteristic. They were called the sons of Issachar in 1 Chronicles 12:32. The sons of Issachar who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. You see, they saw the future that had already happened. And that's where we are. It's what one author said, it happened gradually, then suddenly. They say that there's a turning every 80 to 100 years. Americans push their society through an urgent, divisive, even violent era of public mobilization and civic upheaval in which their nation is essentially reborn. As Abraham Lincoln said in the Gettysburg Address, that nation so conceived and so dedicated will long endure and not perish from the face of the earth. It has a new birth of freedom. That Battle of Gettysburg was July 1st to the 3rd. He was invoking what our founders considered to be a holy day, Easter, Christmas, and the 4th of July. Dr. Benjamin Rush said, love the Lord, love your country, and love your family. People say, well, why'd you put your country before your family? He says, if you don't have a good country, you won't have a family. And then there's this understanding what's called a preference cascade, where numerous individuals discover something all at the same time. And I think that's what we're witnessing right now. Folks like your pastor are on the tip of the spear, watching as the nation is realizing this sinkhole of secularism. We see the stupidity, and Bud Light didn't get it. And probably the number one brand of beer imploded overnight because people are sick of it. There's two genders. We're enabling dysphoria. If we don't do something, there's going to be, in 20 years, adults whose bodies are mutilated saying, "Where were you? Where were you? You avoided the consequences of truth while I was being mutilated as a 15-year-old, and you said nothing." In 1933, one man who had been relegated to the backbench of the parliament, he was probably the most erudite and brilliant human being in the entirety of the parliament, and they put him to the back of the bench. And in 1933, he said, "We cannot cut our defense spending. We cannot. We have to build it because Hitler is crazy." And they laughed at him. And then Hitler took the Sudetenland, and then he took Poland. And Chamberlain, riddled with cancer on May 10th, 1940, finally resigned as prime minister. And they brought this rotund man from the back of the bench in Parliament and made him the prime minister because he was the only one who saw the future that had already happened. He knew Hitler was evil. And it wasn't Hitler and his victims. It was Hitler and a complicit nation that lied to each other. A nation that was responsible for the Protestant Reformation. We're all descendants of that as we sit in this church. And there wouldn't be a pastor on the planet who in 1933 would have envisioned, especially a German pastor, who would have envisioned their nation being responsible for the gassing and incineration of 6.5 million Jews and the death of over 50 million people. At the time in 1933, when Hitler rose to power, shortly thereafter the Reichstag would burn, there were 3,000 professing pastors who stood in direct opposition to Adolf Hitler, that he would turn Germany into a killing machine. And of the 17,000 evangelical ministers in Germany at the time, 3,000 stood in opposition. On the polar opposite, 3,000 stood lock, stock, and barrel with Hitler, embraced him and his ideals, fascism, National Socialism. But the problem was the 11,000 in the middle, and you could call it a jelly sandwich. They just wanted it all to go away. Maybe if we just keep preaching the gospel. People say, pastors say this to me all the time, I don't do politics. Politics is dirty. I say, well, so's the church. What's your point? Well, I'm tired of voting for the lesser of two evils. Unless Jesus Christ is running for office, you'll always be voting for the lesser of two evils. And then I look at them and I say, politics is the highest form of community. It combines morality with sociability. If God didn't intend us to be in politics, he would have never have invented marriage. I mean, to celebrate a birthday, you got to stay alive. To celebrate an anniversary, you have to stop from killing each other. That's a joke. My wife and I are happily married 34 years. Thank you. And the rest of you, whatever. You do politics in your church meetings. You do politics with your kids. You have rules of engagement. How then shall we now live, as Francis Schaeffer said. Jesus said the two great commandments when tested by an attorney. He said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments hang all the law of the prophets. Love your neighbor as yourself. We add a third commandment that couldn't be more effective at negating the second. I just can't love others until I learn how to love myself. What? You love yourself. Proof. You get a family portrait. It's good or bad based on how one person looks. You. You wake up in the morning, you feed yourself, you bathe yourself. It's all about you. You go, no, Pastor, you don't understand. I don't love myself. I'm ugly. I don't love myself. I'm ugly. I go, if you really didn't love yourself, you'd be happy you were ugly. Did you get that? It's just, you're just seeking negative attention, but attention either way, it's all about me. And why do I focus on this? Because that's a mess we're in right now. We have negated that commandment to love our neighbors ourselves. We've been given, in the 6,000 years of recorded history, the greatest gift God has ever bestowed upon mankind, a constitutional republic. Conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Declaring to a lost world that all men are created equal. Not in capacity, but in dignity. There are many of you in here who could preach better than I can. I'm sure you want to right now. But we're still equal in dignity. Why? Because we've been created in the image of God. 4 times in our birth certificate, God is listed, specifically the laws of nature and nature's God. These are immutable truths. You don't have to be a Christian to understand the law of gravity. Well, I don't believe it exists. Doesn't matter. No, Pastor. I'm going to get me and 1,000 people to chant, you won't die, you'll fly, you won't die, and we're going to run off a cliff together, and you'll see. Yeah, carnage. You're just going to hit the ground. It's an immutable, it's a law of nature. With a God who allows a reasoning mind to grasp his creation. That there's the second law of thermodynamics, that everything reduces to its least common denominator, which flies in the face of evolution. But where are we in contending for that? We don't attend school board meetings anymore. Why? Well, we don't love our neighbor. We're too busy. We love ourselves more than our neighbor. In California, a 15-year-old can have hormone blockers without parental permission. Hormone blockers that are considered inhumane for a serial rapist in prison. Yet we would give them to 15-year-olds. And if we don't embrace their dysphoria, parents will lose their children. And where are the Christians at the school board meetings? We're too busy. You see, it doesn't work that way. We are currently in a very critical cultural revolution. That if the church doesn't awaken to its responsibility, freedom as you know it will be gone. I don't know if you saw the clip of Heidi Persabilla, the MSNBC speaker. She said, Christian nationalists are different than Christians. Christian nationalists, get this. I added that. They believe that rights don't come from government or those in authority. They come from God. Amen. And then she took it back later, but you know what? She serves a jealous God, and we should too. She knows exactly what she's doing. She wants to label anyone who loves God and loves their nation, which is the etymology of the two words, and it's a secular progressive attack. It's an ad hominem attack, as you were pointing out earlier. So is dominionism. This idea that we want to do Sharia law as Christians. We have a very poor understanding of the constitutional republic we've been given. Christianity, onward Christian soldier, when you look at the armament in Ephesians 5 and 6, the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, belt of truth, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, the feet that are shod with the gospel. We contend for truth. And the reason why Hitler was successful, and it wasn't Hitler and his victims, it was Hitler and a complicit nation that were afraid of standing for the consequences of truth. They lied to each other. They lied to their neighbors. They lied to their family. They lied to their enemies. They lied to their bosses. They lied to They lied because they were afraid of the consequences of truth. Well, we're not there. Really? Don't answer this. Just think about it in your mind, because God hasn't, there's now therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. I'm not here to condemn you. But I do want you, to investigate yourself. The unexamined life isn't worth living. How many of you, and don't raise your hand, this is between you and the Lord, how many of you took the shot because you believed in its efficacy, or you took it because you wanted to see your grandkids, or you didn't want to lose your job? If you did the latter, you're a liar, and you were afraid of the consequences of truth. And you probably want me to go home now. And I've been on the road 5 weeks. I'm okay. I'm ready to. But I say that because as a nation, we were caught off guard. And for those of you who say, what a terrible time to be alive. I love this Esther moment. We were fashioned for such a time as this. In the span of history, God declared you'd be alive and fashioned you with a DNA that everything you need is fully equipped to stand for truth in this moment in time. And I share that because we're watching a cultural revolution before our very eyes. As they're rewriting our history, they want to do away with our birth certificate, our Constitution. Whenever a political candidate comes and says, "Can I get your endorsement?" I go, "Well, let me ask you a couple questions. Just two. First one is, please recite for me the 10 Commandments." Oh, you guys got quiet, didn't you? You're not running for office, I guess. And then I said, please, you know what, I'll make it easy on you. You don't have to tell me what they are. Just tell me how many articles are in the U.S. Constitution. Oh, I don't know. So I'm going to give my authority, my sovereignty, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. I'm the sovereign, so are you. I'm going to put that sovereignty on loan to you, and I'll be protected by those articles in the Constitution that you're going to swear to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and you don't know what's in them? Yeah, go and do your homework and then come back. And by the way, find out how many amendments there are. For those of you who know, there's 7 articles, 27 amendments. And when our nation was founded, they looked at Isaiah 33:22. The Lord is our judge, our king, and our lawgiver. Executive, legislative, and judicial branch. Checks and balance. And they designed it because they knew that the nature of man was deceitful above all else. The heart was. And what they did is they did a bottom-up form of government. The only revolution in the history of the world that was for the betterment of man. And they declared that you and I would be the sovereign. In our preamble of our Constitution, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, do ordain and establish. And they declared us to be the sovereign. And then they created, and they were at loggerheads at the Constitutional Convention. They were at loggerheads. They couldn't come up with an answer because the larger states had more population. They had some cities that had more population in the cities than the colony itself had in another location. They wanted representation based on their population. The slave states wanted to count slaves, but they didn't want to consider them, human beings or give them the ability to vote. And they were going back and forth. And they were about to go up against, again, the greatest nation in the face of the earth that just defeated the second greatest nation, which is, Britain. And they just defeated France. And we'd won the Revolutionary War there at the Constitutional Convention trying to write this thing. We'd have the War of 1812 where they burned the White House later. But as they're in the midst of this and they come to loggerheads, they can't figure out representation. Benjamin Franklin, the only founder who has his signature on all 3 of the major documents, the Paris Peace Accord, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and he says, I move, and he gives us beautiful oratory about taking a break for 3 days of fasting and prayer. And they did. And they came back and they designed the most profound form of government ever devised in the history of the world, a bicameral legislature. The upper house, the Senate, you'd get equal. Every state gets 2 senators. The lower house would be based on population. And what they did is they said the lower house would be the only portion of government the people would directly elect. And those that were elected as congressional members would then appoint the senators. Today we elect senators, which is a shame, but they would appoint the senators for their state. And then the president would be elected by the Electoral College, which would be a gathering, in a sense, of representatives for the Congress. And those votes would be based on the number of congressional members, and that's the Electoral College. And then the president would appoint the judiciary. And so the people were allowed to elect the lower house of a bicameral legislature. But they wanted to make that lower house the most powerful. So they gave them the purse strings. Now they're powerful. And it's representative. And it's a constitutional republic because it's representation. And where did we get that? We got it from the children of Israel. When Jethro said to Moses, appoint godly men who are not covetous, who love the law over thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens, federal, state, county, local. And their constitution was obviously the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. Ours was, as you can see, the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. And they gave the lower house the purse strings. They were in charge of the money. And so you have the eloquence of our birth certificate, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For this purpose, governments were instituted among men. Wow. Eloquent, poetic. Even the preamble I quoted earlier was lovely. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, do ordain and establish. But then they did the very first of the amendments in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And the very first one, and the first 16 words are angry and prohibitive. And it's directed at that Congress. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Nobody gets between God and man worshiping God, ever. Is that understood? And all of a sudden, where you look in the Beatitudes, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Meek. It wasn't considered an asset in the Greek culture, but to God it is. Meekness is a bit in a horse's mouth. This massive beast controlled by a small piece of metal, and if the master pulls to the right, the beast goes to the right. He pulls to the left, goes to the left. Pulls back, they stop. It means that you and I are under the master's control. And those who are submitted to the Lord and are under the master's control, you will inherit the earth. How do I know this? You're in the United States of America. We represent 4% of the world's population. We have more patents, Nobel Peace Prize winners, more symphonies, more accumulation of wealth than any other nation in the history of the world. You ride in an elevator, it was invented by an American. You fly in a plane, it was invented by an American. You enjoy air conditioning, which isn't on here. It was invented by an American. You enjoy light, it was invented by an American. You enjoy the internet, it was invented by an American, not Al Gore. And how did this 4% of the population inherit such prominence? Religious separatists, governed by the master, seeking religious freedom, blown off course, the very first political compact, the Mayflower Compact. And there's your heritage. And that nation, understanding the importance of God. Look, this isn't Sharia law. You know the beauty of our Constitution, for those of you who think, well, yeah, my rights are from God, but that's just between me and the Lord. No. Don't hold the label Christian and think you can get away with that statement. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. You know what the word all means? All. Pagans too. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That's a Jeffersonian way of saying any idiot can understand this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness isn't an emotion. It was the highest virtue to the Greek mindset. Can I have that water bottle? Thank you. This is a good water bottle because it's doing what it was designed to do. That is the virtue of happiness. We were created to bring glory to God, to be fruitful and multiply. And that's the happiness. And God is the fullness of joy. And they put it in the order life. Liberty and happiness are scarce little value if you're dead. Life. We defend it. Well, it's a woman's choice. No, the choice belongs to that other human being as well that's in the womb of the mother. Oh, it's too... Thank you. Praise the Lord. No. It's too small to be a human being. Oh, so you're saying small people are less valuable than larger people? Well, it's its level of development. It's not fully developed. So an adolescent is less valuable than a fully grown adult? It's its environment. It's in the womb of its mother. Oh, so I'm less valuable here in Ohio than I am in California? And the strongest case they have is the degree of dependency. It's dependent on its mother to live. Yeah, it is. So you're telling me that somebody in here who's dependent on insulin or oxygen is less valuable? It can't be anything else but a human being. It can't. Now, it's hard to defend, but it's the right thing to do. And you know why you don't want to do it? Because they won't like you. Christians need to quit being so concerned about being liked. A missionary goes where he's not loved but needed and leaves when he's no longer needed but loved. 12 disciples turned the world right side up. They didn't have any seminaries or Christian radio stations or bookstores. And they contended with the most brutal government the world has ever known. And to be a bishop, you had to be missing a limb. They were beaten. They counted it a blessing. And we get upset and cower when they call us a Christian nationalist. We're unlike Sharia law, we don't enforce people to adhere to Christendom, but we do acknowledge the laws of nature and nature's God. Even the pagan doesn't want his property stolen. Even the pagan doesn't want his children murdered. We contend for our neighbors. That's the idea. And why? Because they're inalienable rights, not just yours, your neighbors. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two laws hang all the law of the prophets. I was brought before the judge on my second contempt charge because we had the audacity to keep the church open and defy a governor who said the church was non-essential. Strip clubs were essential. And I remember my friend Mike Huckabee said, pastor should take his tie off and call it a strip club. I did it. And I got on Hannity, and I didn't, it's like, wow. I did a few gyrations, so it was kind of cool, but it was hyperbole. I was just making a joke of the stupidity. Strip clubs were essential. Abortion clinics were essential. And in California, we don't just rip the baby apart in the womb of the mother and flush its parts into the sewer system of the state. No. We harvest the heart on the downbeat. We take the organs. We make Nazi Germany look like Girl Scouts. And abortion was legal long before 73 in California. It's been estimated that we've aborted more children in the state of California than the current population of Canada. And my church, group of churches, Calvary Chapel, started in California in 1968. Reagan was governor. We had the 5th largest GDP. We had just completed the California Aqueduct, which was a marvel in civil engineering, taking the snowfall from the Sierras into the rich farmlands of the San Joaquin Valley that produces more cotton than the entire South combined. And Chuck Smith comes to Calvary Chapel and begins this experiment by teaching the Bible verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book. And what had happened is, in 1968, we had the My Massacre and the Tet Offensive. And Bobby Kennedy had been shot by Sirhan Sirhan. And Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot in 68 on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. And all these young people had been promised hope and change, watch their heroes dying and their classmates dying in hamlets and villages of the names they couldn't pronounce in some Asian country they knew nothing about, while the industrial war machine was eviscerating our young people. My dad had 3 tours of Vietnam. The hardest thing to bring him to Christ was the shame he had by launching rockets into a hamlet and having to go in and count the Viet Cong dead and seeing women holding their babies. He just didn't think God could forgive him. We adopted a Vietnamese family. They lived with us for 3 years. All their children went on to be doctors. My parents loved this country. I wasn't raised in a Christian home, but doggone it, they did better than most Christians do. And in 1968, when the nation was being torn apart in the warp and the woof of the fabric of the country as communism was rearing its ugly head, and the one speaking boldly was Billy Graham, of all people. No longer will you find that in the pulpits of America. And all these young people were disillusioned with the church because they weren't dealing with issues, so they checked out of the church in massive numbers and started experimental drug use and experimenting with Eastern religions, and they ended up awash on the shores of California, burned out in the hippie movement. And Chuck and his wife Kay looked out at this sea of humanity that just smelled like the north end of a southbound donkey, and they reached out to minister to them. And they avoided politics because they knew these kids were burned out on it. And they kept the main thing, the plain thing, and the plain thing, the main thing. And they taught the Bible verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book. They brought in syncopated rhythms, called it Maranatha music. And the first megachurch was Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And we experienced 10,000% growth since 1968. And that's conversion growth, not transfer growth, because Calvary Chapels throw the net out every Sunday. Do you believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ? If you believe in your heart, confess your tongue, Jesus Lord, you will be saved. Glory to the Father, God bless you. I see your hand, amen. We do that every Sunday. Harvest Crusades with Greg Laurie. Somebody Loves You Crusades with Raul Reese. Largest missions movement in modern history. There's now almost 2,000 Calvary Chapels around the world. At one point, 5 of the 10 largest churches in America were Calvary Chapels. But the lion's share of the Calvary Chapels are all in California. South of Van Nuys to the Mexican border, there are more Calvary Chapels than there are Dunkin' Donuts. And how has that affected the state of California, avoiding politics, but preaching the gospel verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book? Well, we no longer have the 5th largest GDP. We now have the 6th. We have the highest gas tax, sales tax, income tax, corporate tax. We lead the nation in debt. You combine the next 4 largest states' debt, it doesn't equal the debt of California. We're the authors of no-fault divorce that Reagan signed in 69, became law in 70, and decimated marriage across the country. He said it's the worst piece of legislation he ever signed. We're the authors of transgender bathroom bills and the most secular, progressive sexual education curriculum, so vile I can't read a page of it to you. And now we're mutilating our kids. Where's the power of the gospel there? As I said earlier, we've aborted more children than the current population of Canada. Where's the power of that gospel? What are we saving people unto? Loving their neighbor? My generation was wiped out, and you tell me Black Lives Matter, really? Then where were you in Roe v. Wade? Because 4% of the nation's population, childbearing black females, are responsible for almost 40% of the abortions. It's a holocaust on the black community. Where's the voice on that? But we don't do politics. And a lot of you are thinking I'm dumping on you. I'm not. I want to encourage you. You are doing the right thing. This is exactly where we're supposed to be. And I'll conclude with this. I got beat up real bad my an itinerant minister who was beloved in the Calvary system, whose name is to remain anonymous. And he was upset that I was too political. And he said, that's the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and of Herod. And he just read me the riot act. And I admired this man. I loved him. And I just didn't settle well with me. So I went back to Matthew 16 and I read about Jesus telling the disciples, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, Mark 8, and of Herod. And then he goes in to Matthew 16 where he takes the disciples up to Caesarea Philippi, the headwaters of the Jordan. Long walk for these Orthodox Jewish boys, probably never left home. And the headwaters of the Jordan up in Caesarea Philippi is the most resplendent, beautiful place I've ever seen. I've been there 22 times. And every nation that has dominated the region has set up a temple to their god or goddess there because it's just resplendent. It's beautiful. It's cool in the midst of the desert air. And up on the cliff are all the carvings of these gods and goddesses of past civilizations that have claimed where their God resides. And Jesus brings his disciples up to these headwaters. And at the time, Rome is occupying the region, so they're worshiping Aphrodite or Bacchus, the god of alcohol, drunken revelry, probably nudity, and these Orthodox boys, oh my God, look at that. What are you, crazy? Look at that. Meshuggah. I don't know how they talk. But in the cacophony of noise of pagan worship, Jesus turns to him and says, hey, who do men say that I am? Some say you're John the Baptist, others say Elijah, some say you're Jeremiah. He says, who do you say that I am? Peter. God bless Peter. Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. You're the Messiah. You're the Savior of the world. Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And upon this rock I will build my. You say that, but that's not the word. Ecclesia. Jesus didn't use a religious term. He didn't say synagogue or temple. He deliberately used a secular term that Aristotle defined hundreds of years earlier. Ecclesia. Ecclesia is where the citizens of the city-states of Greece would gather to decide the welfare of the citizenry. Roads, lighting, military. Now in context, it fits. Upon this rock, I'll build my public square. Upon this rock, I'll build my city hall. And the gates, which enslave, will not prevail. Wow. That's a whole different meaning. So when Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and of Herod, what he's saying is, beware of the priestly and the kingly class who has ruled civilization for 6,000 years by causing the peons of the populace to be the saddle they ride. Remember, we're created equal in this sense. What he's saying is, beware of establishing civil law apart from moral law. In the stairwell of Harvard Law School is a plaque that commemorates one of the most profound graduation speeches that has been invoked every year to the graduating class of all Harvard Law students. And this is what it says. The law is the wise restraints that make men free. How do restraints make you free? Any athlete understands this, so do parents. For athletes who are successful, while their friends are out on Friday night partying, they're in bed early because they got morning practice. And you don't stand on the victory block unless you apply restraints. Anyone who's a good student, while your classmates are floundering in their obscurity, you understand this. You're going to bed early and you're doing your homework. You're front-loading your life and you're applying restraints towards those sins that easily beset you. Parents understand this. You don't give to a child when it cries. If you give to a child when it cries and a pig when it oinks, the Danish proverb is, you'll end up with a fine pig and a rotten child. You front load your life. Freedom is having choices. You apply restraints and you educate yourself. That's why we pay doctors more than hamburger flippers. Want equity. Equity's communism. How do we know communism's wrong? It's a violation of one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not steal. 2 of them. You see, the law is a wise restraint that make men free. How does it make you free? The law doesn't save, but Galatians 3 says the law is a school teacher, guardian, to point us to Christ until faith comes. Our founders got it. The number one book our founders quoted more than any other book in the world was the Bible, and the number one book of the Bible that they quoted more than any other was Deuteronomy. Because they obtained civil law and they understood that on the facade of the Supreme Court building, Moses holding the Ten Commandments, from the moral law comes civil law. You don't demand adherence, but you recognize the laws of nature and nature's God, that he's a noble and rational God, that we can study and grow and understand that there's absolutes. And 2 + 2 is 4, and I don't care if you feel it should be 3. These are the laws of nature, and Christians should contend for that for the sake of our neighbor. The laws are wise restraints that make men free. From the moral law comes civil law. If you take away the moral law, the law becomes a weapon to enslave you. If you doubt me, come to California with Governor Mussolini. I was just in Korea. I spoke at an event called Build Up Korea. These Koreans saw what we were doing with Turning Point, and they want their nation to awaken. They have a cemetery to the missionaries who gave them their written language. They honor these Christians. It's the second most Christian nation in all of Asia. Koreans love America more than Americans do. Every day they have guns facing them from the 38th parallel that 34,224 Americans bled and died to establish. And when that 38th parallel was established, the South got all the hills. The North got all the beautiful farmland. But the South got something that the North didn't, that 34,000 plus American soldiers secured, and that was liberty, freedom. And now Korea has the 9th largest GDP. Their streets are immaculate. Their people are lovely. Their food is tremendous. As you can see, I've enjoyed a lot of it. And they love the Lord and they love America. And all they have to do is look at the Korean Peninsula at night. Just Google it. The North is dark, and the South is lit with industry. The North's GDP is in the 400s, and their people are eating dirt. They didn't get freedom. They got tyranny. And for those of you who believe that Christianity can survive in any government, you are wholly wrong. It's not flourishing in North Korea. Some of the largest churches in the world are in South Korea. And the reason why their country is flourishing is because they understand to protect private property. We don't even know the moral law. Christians have abdicated the moral law because we think the law is just there to show us we can't keep it and we're saved by grace through faith. It's a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. No, the law points us to Christ till faith comes, and the law is established for nations. Jesus said, go and make disciples. He didn't just say make disciples. He did make disciples of all nations. Nations are boundaries, borders, compacts, constitutions, and ideologies. We'll be judged individually whether the blood of Christ covers us, but nations will be judged corporately whether or not their citizenry had access to the living God and truth. And we're going to close with a lesson. And when you're finished, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it with your children, repeat, repeat, do it with your grandchildren, repeat, and repeat. We must know this as a nation. This isn't Sharia law. This is for the sake of our neighbors. You funnel every decision you make as you contend on that school board through these 10 things, and the laws will allow mankind to flourish, and they'll know the truth, and the truth will set them free. Blessed is a nation whose God is the Lord. We don't enforce or demand adherence to Christianity, but we do contend for truth. And this is America. This is where we debate. But now we don't want to debate. We want safe spaces. And here's the thing that the governor did to us. He said you couldn't meet in person. You could only meet on the internet. So we stayed open, but I was on the internet. He didn't like what I was saying, so I have a lifetime ban on YouTube. Censorship. The censorship has been unbelievable. Unbelievable. What they've done to doctors in the medical industry. We look at VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Events Reaction Site. The number of deaths far exceeds anything that COVID ever had. They hide the data. And here's why. As Stephen pointed out, the truth is never afraid of a lie. But a lie can't survive in the presence of truth, so they have to censor it to put forward their propaganda, their lie. I don't want to hear what you have to say. That's because you don't want to be challenged with truth. And I won't quit because, listen, people aren't the enemy. They're the opportunity. Jesus says, you've heard that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Jesus says, no, what I say to you is love your enemy and do good to those who spitefully use you. I entered into politics because I love my neighbor. And I remember one guy in particular, when we were facing the police coming to arrest me and 1,000 congregants or visitors. And then this man wanted to open a gun store in California. And some of you go, that's, you don't understand, that's like a unicorn. A gun store in California is like, oh my God. And I was on the council and I helped him get it through, just stayed with the Constitution. He got his gun store, and then 4 of our congregants, 2 of them, one was my son-in-law, another was a member of our worship team. They're both named Micah. And they went in, they showed up at a store, and they began to drywall it and do his electrical. He goes, what are you doing? He says, listen, he was an atheist. He goes, what are you doing here? We said, we're members of the church, and our pastor's the mayor, and we just love that you opened the gun store. We're gun enthusiasts, and they're really very well trained. They have concealed weapons permits. You come into our church, you get a high-speed lead infusion if you're doing dirty. I have a Glock for the flock. He says, why are you doing this? And they said, because we wouldn't have the First Amendment without the Second Amendment. And he thought about it, and he's an atheist. And they helped him do it, and the store was successful. And then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And the press descends on us. And what was cool is I showed up at church that day, and 1,000 people traveled from all over the country just to surround our church saying, we'll take the citation. You guys worship in peace. It was the coolest move of God's Spirit I've ever seen. Well, my favorite was a gun store owner. He held up a sign. Forgive me if I'm going to be an expletive in church, but he held up a sign that said, it took this kind of SHI to get this atheist to church. He now is in the second row as a believer in Jesus Christ. I used to say I had a gift of preaching a church down to a manageable size. People go, oh, you like the church, but the pastor's too political, and they leave. And then they all came back. And the church grew 400% overnight. We baptized 3 times as many people in the church as the attendance was 2 years ago. These are atheists, agnostics, Mormons, Jews. I mean, just go down the list. We defended their businesses. And they came in and they gave their heart to the Lord. One lady said to me on a trip to Israel, she said, I came for the politics and I stayed for Jesus. Because we loved our neighbor. How do we love our neighbor? Here we go, folks. I leave you with this. Everybody hold up one finger. Everybody, please, say one God. Hold up 2 fingers. Bend the second one. No idols, don't bow down. 3 fingers. Cover your mouth. Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. 4 fingers. Make a pillow. Honor the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. 5 fingers. Salute. Honor your mother and father. The only commandment that comes with a promise, you'll live long on the earth in which I've given you. Then that 5, just take 1 finger, make a gun. Don't murder. This is my favorite. 2 fingers and 5 fingers. Don't commit adultery. There's 2 in a marriage, not 5. 8, hide your thumbs, because if you steal, we're going to cut them off. 9, it's 5, not 4. It's 4, not 5. Don't bear false witness. And then 10, do this. Don't covet. Memorize those. Teach your children. Teach your grandchildren. And anyone who runs for office, make sure they know them. Make sure they know the 7 articles of the Constitution. Revisit who you are. Don't forget that you are Americans in the land that's responsible for 80 cents in every dollar in evangelism. And if this lighthouse in freedom is extinguished, the world will grow dark. And if you're pre-trib, pre-millennial like we are at Calvary Chapel, and you think you're going to use your eschatology as justification for apathy and inactivity because you think the Antichrist is an unstoppable being, last time I checked, Jesus says, you don't know the day or the hour. And he said, occupy until I come. So stop it. Quit being more concerned with a rapture than you are with revival. And I close with what I began with. You don't treat that guy right, we're going to steal him. God bless you all. Thank you.
Clear Truth Conference is presented by Redemption Church in Monclova, Ohio. For more clear biblical teaching, visit experienceredemption.com.